door didn't creak, it slammed. Ilara Vane had exactly 2 seconds to decide whether to scream or stay silent, and both choices meant her daughter might die. "Search every crate," barked the guard captain, his voice bouncing off the low stone ceiling of the laundry cellar. Matron Coldwell said, "There's a child down here that shouldn't exist. Find it." Ilara pressed her back against the cold wall behind the drying racks, her infant daughter cradled so tightly against her chest that the baby let out a small, muffled whimper of protest. "Not now, Ren. Please, not now." Let's take a quick break. Like this video and tell me where you're watching from. I'm curious to see which country shows up the most. Now, let's continue. 6 months. 6 months of stolen milk, of nursing in root cellars, of wrapping her body in linen so the swell of her belly never showed beneath her apron. 6 months of praying to the Mother Moon that no one would notice the Omega laundress who flinched every time a wolf walked too close. And now, on a night thick with sleet and bad luck, someone had noticed. Boots scraped against stone, a lantern swung closer, its light crawling along the wall like a hunting animal. Ilara's heart slammed so hard she was certain the guards could hear it. Werewolves had ears that could catch a rabbit's pulse from 30 feet away. A human heartbeat, drumming with terror, would be a beacon. "There," a second voice said, "behind the racks, I smell milk." Ilara's knees buckled. She had one thought left, one animal instinct clawing up through the fear: run. But there was nowhere to run. The cellar had one door, and 4 armed men stood between her and it. So she did the only thing a mother in her position had left to do. She stepped out of the shadows, dropped to her knees on the freezing stone, and held her daughter up like an offering, like a shield, like the only thing in the world worth begging for. "Please," she cried, her voice cracking down the middle. "Please, don't take my daughter. She's done nothing. She's just a baby. Take me. Do whatever you want with me, but don't take her." The guard captain's eyes flicked to the infant's face, illuminated now in lantern light, and he went very, very still, because the baby had opened her eyes. They were not blue, they were not brown. They burned a deep, molten amber gold, glowing faintly even in the dim cellar, a color that belonged to exactly one bloodline in the entire kingdom of Valor, the Draven Flame, the eyes of kings. What none of them knew, not the guard captain, not Ilara, not even the moon herself, it seemed, was that the corridor directly above the cellar stairs was not empty. Alpha King Cassian Draven had been unable to sleep for over a year now. His wolf had been restless since the night of the Hunter's Moon Festival, restless, grieving, searching for something it could never quite name. Tonight, unable to bear another hour trapped inside his own marriage, his own crown, his own gilded cage of a life, he had wandered down into the servants' halls, simply to remember what silence felt like. He heard the scream before he understood the words. "Please, don't take my daughter." Cassian's whole body locked in place. It wasn't the words that stopped him. It was the voice underneath them, a voice his wolf recognized before his mind did, a voice that had haunted a year of restless nights and empty forests. A voice he had once heard laughing beneath a canopy of autumn leaves, warm and unguarded, and utterly, completely his. His wolf surged against his ribs so violently he had to brace one hand against the stone wall to stay upright. Mate. And beneath that scent, rain and wildflowers and something achingly familiar, there was a second scent, smaller, newer, a scent that carried unmistakable traces of his own blood. King Cassian Draven, ruler of Valor, alpha of the Northern Pax, a man who had not shed a single tear since the day his father died, felt his amber eyes begin to burn gold with a fury he had never once allowed himself to feel. Somewhere below him, armed men were seconds away from tearing his family apart. He was not going to let that happen. A little over a year earlier, Cassian would have told anyone who asked that he did not believe in fate. He believed in duty, in bloodlines, in the cold arithmetic of alliances that kept the 7 packs of Valor from tearing each other apart. He had been raised to understand that an alpha's heart was a luxury his crown could not afford. Then came the Hunter's Moon Festival, the one night a year when rank dissolved behind masks of carved bone and silver, when Omega and Alpha and Beta could dance around the same bonfire as equals. He had slipped away from his guards that night, a small, reckless rebellion, and collided, quite literally, with a woman running from nothing and everything at once. Her mask had been carved into the shape of a sparrow. Her laugh, when he'd apologized, had undone something in his chest that duty had spent 26 years carefully sealing shut. They hadn't exchanged names. Names felt dangerous. That night. Too real. Too permanent for two strangers stealing a few stolen hours beneath the trees. But when her hand brushed his wolf had risen inside him and howled a single word so loud it drowned out every lesson about duty he had ever learned. Mate, he remembered promising her the sunrise. He remembered whispering that he would find her again, that he would claim her before the whole pack, that nothing, not rank, not politics, not the will of any council, would keep them apart. He had meant every word. But dawn had brought a different kind of howling. His father, the old king, found dead in his sleep, a crown lowered onto Cassian's head before the blood had even dried. And within the same terrible week, a council of elders, desperate to secure the northern border, forcing his hand into marriage with Isolde Kestrel, daughter of the most powerful warlord in Valor. He had searched for the sparrow-masked girl for months, sent riders into every village, questioned every Omega who might have slipped away from the bonfire that night. He had torn apart his own kingdom, looking for her, and found nothing but silence. He never once thought to look inside the walls of his own castle. He never once imagined she'd been there the entire time, scrubbing his floors, washing his linens, hiding his child in the shadows just beneath his feet. Elara had made her choice the morning after the festival, standing at the back of a crowd she wasn't important enough to be noticed in, watching the masked stranger from the woods be crowned with a heavy iron circlet and married off within the same breath to a woman with a smile like a drawn blade. She had known, in that instant, exactly what would happen if anyone discovered what had passed between them. Queen Isolde's family had not clawed their way into royal favor by tolerating rivals. An Omega servant, carrying the Alpha King's mate-bonded child, would not be seen as a tragic accident of fate. She would be seen as a threat to be erased. So Elara Vane had done what generations of powerless women before her had done. She swallowed her fear, buried her grief, and survived. For 6 months, survival had looked like silence. Tonight, survival looked like kneeling on cold stone with her daughter held up like a sacrifice, praying that somewhere in this castle, someone still remembered what mercy was. She had no idea that mercy was already thundering down the stairs above her, wearing a crown, with murder in his amber eyes. The stairwell shook, not from an earthquake, not from thunder, from the sheer, suffocating pressure of an Alpha King's fury rolling down the stone steps like a living thing. The guard captain in the cellar felt it before he heard it, a weight pressing into his lungs, forcing the air out of them, buckling his knees before he even understood why. Every wolf in Valor knew that feeling. It was the unmistakable signature of dominance, so absolute it bordered on violence. "Captain," one of the younger guards choked out, already sinking toward the floor. "That's—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. King Cassian Draven appeared at the bottom of the stairwell like a shadow given teeth. He wasn't in his ceremonial robes. He wore only the loose linen shirt he'd worn to bed, and it didn't matter. The raw authority radiating from him would have brought grown alphas to their knees in silk or in rags. His amber eyes swept the cellar once, took in the guards, took in the lantern light, took in the kneeling woman with the crying infant clutched to her chest. And then he saw her face. The world went perfectly, terribly silent inside his own skull. It's her. A year of searching, a year of half-empty nights, and a wolf that howled itself hoarse against a locked cage of duty. And she had been here, soot-streaked, exhausted, her once warm laugh replaced with raw terror, kneeling on a cellar floor, begging armed men not to kill their daughter. "Step away from her," Cassian said. His voice did not rise. It didn't need to. It cracked through the room like a whip made of frost. The guard captain spun, sword half drawn, before recognition hit him like a physical blow. Your Majesty," "I said," Cassian repeated, closing the distance in 3 unhurried strides, each one seeming to bend the very air around him. "Step away from her." The guards scattered like leaves in a windstorm, pressing themselves against the stone walls, several of them dropping fully to their knees in submission, without being told to. No one in that cellar had ever felt an alpha's rage at full, unguarded strength before. It was not something a body forgot. Cassian didn't spare them another glance. He knelt, the Alpha King of Valor, on his knees, on a filthy cellar floor, in front of an Omega laundress. The entire court didn't know his name. "You," Ilara whispered, her voice breaking apart entirely. Every wall she had built over a year of silence cracked at once. You're the man from the bonfire." "I never stopped looking for you," Cassian said, and his voice, the voice that had just sent grown warriors cowering, shook like a boy's. His eyes dropped to the infant in her arms, to the small face turned toward him, to the eyes that mirrored his own, so exactly it stole the breath from his lungs. "Is she? She's yours," Ilara said, and then, because a year of terror didn't dissolve simply because the danger had a familiar face, she added, desperate and pleading, "Please don't take her from me. I'll do anything. I'll leave the kingdom tonight. I'll never tell anyone who fathered her. Just, please, don't let them hurt her." Something in Cassian's chest cracked wide open. He reached out, slow and careful, the way a man reaches towards something he is terrified will vanish if he moves too fast, and gently cupped the back of his daughter's head. The baby's frightened whimpering eased almost instantly, soothed by a scent her small body somehow already recognized as belonging to her. "No one is taking her anywhere," Cassian said, quiet and absolute. "No one is taking either of you anywhere, not while I still draw breath." He rose to his feet, gathering Ilara up with one arm and cradling his daughter against his chest with the other, as though the weight of both of them together was the lightest thing he had carried in over a year. The guard captain, still frozen against the wall, found his voice at last. "Your Majesty, Matron Coldwell ordered this search on the Queen's direct command. If we return empty-handed, you will tell Matron Coldwell," Cassian said, his voice dropping into something low and lethal, "that her search is over, and you will tell her that I will be paying her a visit myself, very soon." Later, in the privacy of a small guest chamber, far from the royal wing, Ilara sat wrapped in a fur cloak that smelled like rain and cedar, and him, watching the Alpha King of Valor pace the length of the room, like a man trying to outrun his own guilt. "A year," he said, more to himself than to her. "A year, and you were scrubbing my floors just beneath me." "I didn't want to be found," Ilara admitted quietly. "Finding me would have meant losing everything you had, your crown, your alliance with House Kestrel, maybe your life, if Lord Baldric decided a bastard heir was worth starting a war over. You thought I'd choose a crown over you." "I thought," Ilara said, and her voice wavered, raw honesty spilling out after a year of careful silence, "that I didn't have the right to ask you to choose at all. You didn't know I existed beyond one night. I couldn't walk into your throne room and demand you tear your kingdom apart for a servant girl you'd never see again." Cassian stopped pacing. He crossed the room and knelt in front of her chair, the way he had knelt on the cellar floor, not as a king, but as a man laying something fragile and precious at her feet. "You should have told me," he said, gentler now. "Not for the crown's sake, for yours. You carried her, completely alone, in a castle full of people who would have destroyed you both for existing. You shouldn't have had to survive that by yourself." Ilara looked down at their daughter, sleeping peacefully now in the crook of her arm, utterly unaware of how close she had come to losing everything tonight. "I named her Wren," she said softly. "Small birds, plain feathers, easy to overlook." I needed her to be the kind of name nobody would ever think to go hunting for. Cassian's throat worked. He reached out and brushed one careful finger against his daughter's small cheek. She won't be overlooked for very much longer, he said, and neither will you. Ilara's eyes lifted to his, wary despite everything. You're still married, Cassian, to a woman whose family could burn half this kingdom down if provoked. The warmth in Cassian's expression cooled into something harder, older, more dangerous. Isolde ordered guards into the servants' quarters at midnight to hunt a child, he said. That is no longer a marriage I intend to protect. Outside the small chamber window, thunderclouds were already gathering over the towers of Ravenspire Keep, dark and restless, as though the sky itself understood that morning would not be quiet. Ilara pulled the fur cloak tighter around her shoulders and let herself remember, just for a moment, the exact sound of his laugh beneath the bonfire a little over a year ago, unguarded, boyish, nothing at all like the low, controlled voice of the king who had just torn a door off its hinges to save her. Tell me something, she said quietly. That night, did you know, even then, that I wasn't a noble? My hands were rough. My mask was cheap wood, not carved bone like the others. Cassian sat on the edge of the bed across from her chair, his large frame somehow making the sturdy furniture look fragile. I noticed, he admitted. I noticed, and I found I didn't care in the slightest. You laughed like someone who'd never been taught to perform happiness for an audience. Every noble woman I'd ever danced with laughed like they were being watched. You laughed like you'd forgotten anyone else existed. I had forgotten, Ilara murmured. For a few hours, I forgot I was an Omega. I forgot I was supposed to be invisible. I just felt like a person standing in front of another person. That's exactly what my wolf wanted, Cassian said. Not a queen, not an alliance. Just that. A person choosing me because she wanted to, not because a council decided it was strategically necessary. Ilara looked down at her daughter's sleeping face, the small chest rising and falling in the steady rhythm of a child who finally felt safe. And now you have both of us, she said. A person who chose you, and a daughter neither of us planned for. Now I have everything, Cassian corrected softly, that I have been pretending, for over a year, not to want. He reached out and took her hand, calloused fingers wrapping gently around hers, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke at all. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was the particular, fragile silence of two people who had spent a year grieving something they didn't know the other person was grieving too. There's a council meeting at first light, Cassian finally said, reluctant to break the moment, but unable to ignore the responsibility pressing down on him. I'll need to decide, before the sun rises, exactly how much of tonight I'm willing to make public, and how much will start a war I can't win in a single morning. Whatever you decide, Ilara said, I trust you to choose carefully. I've watched you tonight. You didn't choose violence when you could have. You chose to protect us first, and justice second. That tells me everything I need to know about the kind of king you've become. Cassian pressed a kiss to her knuckles, the same reverent gesture he would repeat, days later, in front of an entire court. I intend to keep choosing exactly that, he said, for as long as I have the chance to. 6 months earlier, in a chamber draped entirely in black silk, Queen Isolde Kestrel had knelt before a woman the court did not know existed. The stranger called herself Old Maren. She lived in the reeking marshlands beyond the castle's western wall, in a hut most nobles pretended didn't exist, practicing a kind of magic the Pax of Valor had outlawed 3 generations ago. Married a year now to an alpha king, Old Maren rasped, stirring a thick black liquid in a cracked clay bowl, and still no cub in your belly. The court whispers, Your Majesty. They whisper louder every season. I know what they whisper, Isolde snapped, though the venom in her voice couldn't quite hide the fear beneath it. I need a solution, not a diagnosis. Old Maren's clouded eyes lifted, gleaming with something colder than sympathy. There is no herb, no charm, no spell that will fill an empty womb if the body itself refuses it, Majesty. But there is another way to fill a nursery. Speak plainly. Steal one, Maren said simply, There are always Omegas in a castle this size, carrying children they shouldn't. Find one with royal blood in its veins, take the child, and no one will question a queen's sudden fortune. Bastards vanish quietly, Majesty, especially the ones belonging to nobody important. Isolde had left that hut with a plan already forming in her mind, cold and precise as a knife. Isolde Kestrel had not always been cruel. She had been raised, from birth, to understand that love was a currency her family could not afford to spend freely. Her father, Lord Baldric Kestrel, had built House Kestrel's power on cold, ruthless negotiation, and he had taught his only daughter that sentiment was a weakness enemies exploited. "Marry the crown," he had told her the week before her wedding, gripping her chin so tightly it bruised. "Secure it with an heir. Everything else is decoration." For the better part of a year, Isolde had tried. She had endured a husband whose eyes never once looked at her the way she'd been promised a mate's eyes should. She had endured whispered insults about her barren womb in every corner of the castle. She had endured her father's increasingly cold letters, each one a reminder that House Kestrel's continued protection of her position was not unconditional. A year of trying to earn a place in a marriage that had never once belonged to her. She told herself, standing in old Murren's reeking hut, that stealing a child wasn't cruelty, it was survival. The same survival every powerful woman before her had practiced, dressed up in prettier words. She refused to examine too closely why that justification felt thinner every time she repeated it to herself. Matron Vera Coldwell had served House Kestrel for 11 years before Isolde's marriage, and her loyalty to the family ran deeper than any oath sworn to the crown. When the Queen summoned her to a private chamber and laid out the plan, a quiet decree disguised as a plague inspection, sweeping every servant's quarters for infants bearing the Draven flame, Vera hadn't hesitated for even a moment. "There have been rumors," Vera said, "about the laundress. Ilara Vane. Keeps to the lower halls, barely speaks. Started wearing looser tunics about 6 months back." Isolde's eyes sharpened with sudden, cold interest. "Watch her." "And if the rumors are true, Majesty?" Isolde's smile carried no warmth whatsoever. "Then we finally have our heir. And the mother," she added, almost as an afterthought, "will need to disappear quietly. An Omega laundress vanishing from a castle this size raises no questions at all." Vera bowed low, already calculating how to make a mother's death look like nothing more than an unfortunate accident. Neither woman knew, as they finalized their plan over goblets of spiced wine, that the laundress in question was not merely carrying an Omega's shameful secret. She was carrying the Alpha King's mate-bonded daughter, and the raid they had ordered for that very night would not end with a stolen heir. It would end with the beginning of Isolde Kestrel's downfall. Ilara had first noticed Matron Vera watching her 3 weeks before the raid. A lingering glance in the laundry yard, a too casual question about why she'd started favoring the deep cellar for her evening rounds. She had brushed it off as paranoia at first. 6 months of hiding had left her jumping at shadows, seeing threats in every curious glance. But paranoia, she was about to learn, had kept her alive this long for a reason. The night before the raid, she had woken to the sound of hushed voices outside her small servant's room. Vera's voice, and another she didn't recognize, discussing schedules, guard rotations, the lower cellar, where the laundresses keep their private stores. Ilara had lain frozen in the darkness, one hand pressed protectively over her sleeping daughter, and understood with sick, sinking certainty that her time had run out. She had 1 full day to prepare. 1 day to decide whether to run, to hide, or to pray. She chose, in the end, to do all 3, and it very nearly wasn't enough. Bryn Hollow had been Ilara's only real friend inside the castle walls for years, ever since they'd been assigned to the same laundry rotation as terrified new Omegas barely past their first shift. She was also the only person besides Ilara who knew that baby Wren existed. "You have to run," Bryn whispered, gripping Ilara's hand so tightly it hurt. The two of them crouched behind a stack of linen crates in the pre-dawn dark. Tonight, before the search starts. I heard Matron Coldwell talking to 2 guards. They're starting with the lower cellar. Run where, Bryn? Ilara's voice cracked with exhaustion. I have no coin, no horse, no family beyond this castle's walls. If I run with a 6-month-old in the dead of winter, we'll freeze before we make it past the outer gate. Bryn's face was pale, torn between fear and helpless love for her friend. Then hide her better, somewhere they haven't searched yet. There is nowhere left, Ilara said quietly. I've used every hiding place this cellar has to offer. What Ilara did not know, what she would not learn until it was almost too late, was that Bryn herself had already been cornered. 2 days earlier, Matron Vera had summoned Bryn to her private study, alone, and laid out a choice with the calm precision of a woman who had ruined lives before, and felt nothing about it. Tell me where the laundress hides her child, Vera had said, or I will tell the Queen that you knew and said nothing. Do you understand what happens to an Omega found guilty of concealing treason against the crown, Bryn Hollow? Bryn understood perfectly. She had seen Omegas dragged from these halls before, for crimes far smaller than harboring a royal bastard. She had a younger sister still 2 years from her first shift, a sister who depended entirely on Bryn's wages and Bryn's protection. She had not told Vera the exact hiding place. She hadn't known it, not precisely, but she had confirmed, with a single trembling nod, that the rumors were true, that there was a child, that Ilara had been hiding her for months. That single nod had been enough. It had set the entire raid into motion. Bryn had spent every hour since drowning in guilt so heavy it felt physical, unable to look her closest friend in the eye, terrified that her silence about her own betrayal was somehow worse than the betrayal itself. Ilara, Bryn whispered now, her voice shaking, tears finally spilling over. There's something I need to tell you, something I should have told you 2 days ago. Before she could finish the sentence, the sound of heavy boots echoed down the cellar stairwell. The search had begun early. Bryn's confession would have to wait, and by the time she finally found the courage to speak it, the entire kingdom would already know the truth. The raid that followed was chaos, given a body. Guards fanning out through the servants' quarters, doors thrown open, terrified Omegas and Betas herded into hallways while their private spaces were torn apart in the search for a single infant with impossible eyes. Ilara had barely enough warning to snatch Ren from her makeshift cradle and duck behind the drying racks before the cellar door burst open. What followed was the scene that had already begun to unfold above the stairwell, the guard captain's lantern light crawling closer, the scent of milk giving her away, and finally, the desperate, broken plea that would echo through the entire castle before the night was through. Please, don't take my daughter. Bryn, trapped in the hallway above with the other displaced servants, had heard that scream through the floorboards and felt something inside her chest shatter completely. Whatever guilt she had been carrying about her small, coerced betrayal was nothing compared to the horror of hearing her closest friend beg for her daughter's life because of it. She didn't yet know that the Alpha King himself had heard the same scream, and that his fury was already thundering down the stairs to answer it. She only knew that she had to fix what she'd broken, whatever the cost to herself. By the time the guards retreated from the cellar, dragging their bruised pride and Cassian's furious warning back to Matron Vera, word had already begun to spread through the servants' quarters like wildfire through dry grass. The king was there. The king himself came down into the cellars. The laundress, the eyes on that baby. Bryn heard every fragmented rumor twice over before she found Ilara again, tucked safely now in a guest chamber under royal guard, her daughter sleeping peacefully in her arms, the Alpha King himself standing sentinel by the door. Bryn hesitated in the doorway, shame twisting her stomach into knots. Ilara, I need to tell you something, and I understand if you never forgive me. Ilara's eyes lifted, exhausted but alert. Bryn? Matron Vera came to me 2 days ago, Bryn said, the words tumbling out in a rush before her courage could fail her. She threatened my sister, said she'd accuse me of treason if I didn't confirm the rumors about your baby. I didn't tell her where you hid Ren. I swear on the moon, I didn't know exactly where. But I confirmed the child was real. I confirmed you'd been hiding something for months. I gave them enough to start the search." The room went utterly silent. Cassian's amber eyes sharpened with dangerous interest, filing the name Vera Coldwell away with lethal intent. Ilara stared at her closest friend for a long, aching moment, betrayal and understanding warring plainly across her exhausted face. "You didn't have a choice," Ilara finally said, quiet and raw. "Not really. Not against a threat to your sister." "That doesn't make it right," Bryn whispered, tears streaking down her face. "No," Ilara agreed. "It doesn't, but it makes it human. And I understand human fear better than almost anyone in this castle." Cassian watched the exchange with something unreadable moving behind his amber eyes. A king already calculating how a frightened servant's coerced confession could be turned, tomorrow, into a weapon aimed squarely at his wife's throat. Dawn found Cassian standing alone on the highest balcony of Ravenspire Keep, watching storm clouds gather over the northern mountains. His daughter's soft, unfamiliar weight still somehow present in his arms, even though he'd left her sleeping safely below. He had spent the entire night wrestling with a question that had no comfortable answer. How does a king dismantle a marriage built on political necessity without dismantling the fragile peace that marriage had been built to protect? House Kestrel commanded nearly a third of Valor's northern armies. Lord Baldric was not a man who accepted humiliation quietly. If Cassian moved against Isolde without absolute, undeniable proof of her crimes, he risked plunging his kingdom into a civil war that would cost far more lives than the two he was trying to protect. But if he did nothing, if he allowed Isolde to remain on that throne after what she had ordered, he would be complicit in every future cruelty she committed, with the crown's authority behind her. There was no version of tonight that ended without cost. The only question was who paid it. "You're not sleeping." Ilara's voice, soft behind him, pulled him from his thoughts. She had wrapped herself in a borrowed cloak. Ren finally settled into a proper cradle for the first time in 6 months, and had come looking for him when she woke to an empty room. "I don't sleep well when I'm deciding how to end a war before it starts," Cassian admitted. "Is that what tonight is? A war?" "It's the beginning of one, if I handle it poorly." He turned to face her, the weight of the crown suddenly heavier than it had felt since the day it was first placed on his head. "Isolde's father commands enough soldiers to make this very complicated. If I move against her without proof, the entire council can't dismiss as jealousy or rumor." Ilara stepped closer, close enough that her scent, rain and wildflowers, achingly familiar even now, settled something restless in his chest. "What do you need?" "A confession," Cassian said, "in front of witnesses who can't be bribed or threatened into silence. Vera Coldwell knows everything. If I can get her to speak the truth in open court, Isolde's guilt becomes undeniable, and House Kestrel loses the ground to claim persecution. And if Vera refuses to talk," Cassian's expression hardened into something dangerously calm, "then I remind her that treason against the crown carries a far steeper price than whatever loyalty she owes House Kestrel. Fear built this conspiracy, Ilara. Fear can unbuild it too." Ilara studied him for a long moment. This man she had shared one reckless night a little over a year ago. This stranger who had somehow become both a king and a father within the same impossible night. "You've changed since the bonfire," she said quietly. "I had to," Cassian admitted. The boy who danced with a stranger in a sparrow mask didn't have a kingdom depending on every choice he made. That boy could afford to be reckless. I can't afford that anymore. Not with you, not with her. His eyes drifted, unconsciously, toward the chamber where his daughter slept. "I'm not asking you to be reckless," Ilara said. "I'm asking you to be careful. Isolde has spent a year learning how this castle works. She won't fall without a fight." "No," Cassian agreed grimly. "She won't, but neither will I." The confrontation with Matron Vera happened not in a public hall, but in the cold stone silence of the castle's lower dungeon, where Cassian had ordered her held the moment the failed raid was reported to him. Vera knelt in the straw, her fine robes already dust-streaked, her composure cracking under the weight of an Alpha King's undiluted fury, filling the small cell like smoke. "Tell me who ordered the search," Cassian said, his voice deceptively calm, "and I will consider mercy for your part in it. Continue protecting Isolde Kestrel, and I promise you, mercy will no longer be an option available to either of you." Vera's loyalty to House Kestrel had survived 11 years of service. It did not survive 10 minutes alone with an Alpha King whose eyes burned like judgment itself. "The Queen ordered it," Vera finally whispered, her voice breaking. "She commanded me to search every servant's quarters for an infant bearing the royal bloodline. If I found one, I was to bring the child to her chambers and see to it that the mother did not survive to contest the child's parentage." Cassian's jaw tightened, every muscle in his body coiled with the effort of controlling a fury that wanted, badly, to become something violent. "Will you say that again?" he asked, deathly quiet, in front of the entire royal court. Vera's eyes lifted, wide with terror, understanding exactly what she was being asked to do. Publicly condemn the Queen she had served for over a decade, in front of the most powerful lords in the kingdom. "If I speak against her in open court," Vera whispered, "House Kestrel will destroy what remains of my life the moment your protection isn't watching." "If you don't," Cassian said, "I will destroy what remains of it myself, tonight, in this cell, and no one beyond these walls will ever ask a single question about where you went." It was not, strictly speaking, a threat he intended to carry out. But Vera Coldwell had spent 11 years learning to read dangerous men, and something in Cassian's flat, exhausted certainty convinced her he meant every word. "I'll speak," she finally said, defeated. "Tomorrow, in open court." Later that same morning, once Vera's confession had been secured, Cassian gathered his council of elders in a small stone chamber beneath the throne room. 5 aging alphas whose combined judgment had steered Valor through 3 separate wars, and whose approval, or lack of it, could make or break whatever he planned to do next. "You intend to publicly humiliate House Kestrel," Elder Rothgar said, stroking his grey beard with obvious unease. "Whatever the Queen has done, Your Majesty, humiliating a house that commands a third of our northern strength is a dangerous game to play in open court." "I don't intend to humiliate anyone," Cassian said evenly. "I intend to tell the truth in front of witnesses who cannot later claim they were misled. If the truth humiliates House Kestrel, that is a consequence of their own choices, not mine." "And the child?" asked Elder Isolde, the only woman among the 5, her sharp eyes studying Cassian with the particular scrutiny of someone who had known him since he was a boy, learning to hold a sword. "You intend to name her your heir, publicly, before the ink on Queen Isolde's disgrace has even dried." "I intend to name her what she already is," Cassian replied. "My daughter, born of my true mate. I will not hide either of them in the shadows, the way this castle has forced them to hide for 6 months already. That ends today." Elder Rothgar exchanged a long look with the others, before finally, slowly, nodding. "Then we will stand behind you, Your Majesty. But you should know, Lord Baldric will not accept this quietly. A man like that does not surrender power without drawing blood first, even if it costs him everything to try." "I know exactly what kind of man Lord Baldric is," Cassian said grimly. "I intend to be ready for him." That afternoon, in the private training yard behind the royal wing, Cassian found Ilara watching a pair of young guards spar with wooden practice blades, Ren asleep against her shoulder, her expression distant and thoughtful. "You're thinking about tomorrow," he said, settling beside her on the low stone wall. "I'm thinking about what happens if Lord Baldric doesn't accept defeat quietly," Ilara admitted. "You said yourself he commands a third of the northern armies. What if this doesn't end with a confession and a banishment? What if it ends with soldiers at the gates?" Cassian was quiet for a moment, watching the guards trade blows in the fading afternoon light. "Then I fight for what's mine," he said simply. "I have done it before, and I will do it again, as many times as it takes." "I want to be able to protect her too," Ilara said suddenly, nodding toward their sleeping daughter. Not just hide her, not just run with her into a cellar and pray no one finds us. I want to actually be able to stand between her and whatever comes for us. Something shifted in Cassian's expression, surprise, and beneath it, a flicker of fierce pride. You've never shifted before, he said. It wasn't quite a question. Omega servants aren't given much reason to, Ilara said, a trace of old bitterness coloring her voice. We're taught our place is in human form, scrubbing floors. No one ever bothered to teach me how to become anything else. Cassian rose and extended his hand. Then let me teach you, he said. Not tonight. You're exhausted, and Ren needs you rested. But soon. You are not merely an Omega anymore, Ilara. You are the mate of an Alpha King, carrying that bond in your blood, whether this castle ever acknowledged it or not. Your wolf has been waiting a very long time for permission to exist. Ilara looked down at her hands, at the calluses built from years of lye soap and freezing water, and felt something unfamiliar stir beneath her ribs. Not fear, for once, but something closer to hope. Soon then, she agreed quietly. I'd like that. Isolde Kestrel woke the next morning to a silence that felt, immediately, wrong. Vera had not reported at dawn as instructed. No message had arrived confirming the child's capture, the mother's silence, the quiet nursery preparations that should have already been underway. By mid-morning, dread had curdled into something closer to panic. By the time a royal steward arrived at her chamber door, not with news of a captured infant, but with a formal summons to appear in the great hall within the hour, by direct order of the king, Isolde understood, with sick clarity, exactly what had gone wrong. Somehow, impossibly, her husband already knew. She stood in front of her mirror, hands trembling as her ladies-in-waiting fastened the clasps of her most formal gown, and tried to remember the confident, calculating woman who had knelt in old Merrin's hut 6 months ago, certain she was securing her future rather than destroying it. You knew the risk, she reminded herself, forcing steel back into her spine. You knew what you were gambling. Do not fall apart now. But some risks, once taken, could not be reasoned back into safety. The great hall of Ravenspire Keep had never felt so suffocatingly full. Every lord and lady of standing in Valor's northern territories had been summoned within the hour, their whispered speculation filling the vast stone chamber with a nervous, electric energy that hadn't existed in living memory. No one summoned the entire court on a single morning's notice, unless something catastrophic had happened. A war declared, a death, a scandal too large to contain quietly. Isolde took her place on the raised dais beside the empty throne, forcing her expression into practiced serenity, even as her pulse hammered beneath her collarbone. When the heavy doors finally swung open, it wasn't the king who entered first. It was Vera Coldwell, flanked by 2 royal guards, her face pale and hollow, her eyes fixed firmly on the floor. Isolde's stomach dropped through the marble beneath her feet. King Cassian entered a moment later, not in ceremonial silk, but in the same dark, battle-ready leathers he'd worn the night before. A deliberate message to every lord watching that this was not a court proceeding. This was a reckoning. "My king," Isolde called out, forcing warmth into a voice that shook, despite her best efforts. "You summoned the entire court without warning. Has something happened?" "Something happened last night," Cassian said, his voice carrying easily to every corner of the vast hall without needing to rise. "In the servants' cellars. I'd like Matron Coldwell to explain exactly what, in her own words, in front of everyone gathered here." Isolde's eyes darted to Vera, silently, desperately willing her to stay loyal, to lie, to invent some story that could still save them both. Vera did not look up. 6 months ago, Vera began, her voice trembling but audible in the absolute silence of the hall. Queen Isolde learned that an Omega laundress in the castle's employ might be carrying a child, fathered by the king. She ordered me to arrange a search of the servants' quarters, disguised as a routine health inspection, to locate the infant. Gasps rippled through the assembled nobility like wind through dry wheat. "Continue," Cassian said, quiet and merciless. She instructed me, Vera continued, tears finally spilling down her weathered cheeks, that if the child was found to carry the Draven bloodline, I was to bring it directly to her chambers, to be presented as her own, and that the mother was to be removed, quietly. So there would be no one left alive to contest the child's true parentage. The word hung in the air like a blade. Removed. Every noble in that hall understood exactly what the word meant, and understood, with equal clarity, the magnitude of the crime just confessed in front of them. Attempted murder of a pack member to falsify a royal succession was among the gravest crimes recognized under Valor law, a crime that carried, traditionally, a sentence of death. Lies, Isolde finally choked out, abandoning all pretense of composure. This woman is clearly terrified, clearly coerced. She would say anything under threat. I have not threatened her with anything beyond the truth she already knew, Cassian interrupted, his voice hardening into something that made several nearby lords take an involuntary step backward. And I have not finished, Isolde. Tell them what became of the child last night, Matron Coldwell. Vera's shoulders shook. The king found us before we could complete the search. He rescued the infant himself. A fresh wave of shocked murmurs crashed through the hall. Cassian let the silence stretch, deliberate and merciless, before speaking again. That child, he said, his amber eyes locking onto his wife with an intensity that made the entire hall hold its breath, is my daughter, born to a woman I have loved since before this crown ever touched my head. A woman your household ordered killed, Isolde, to steal her child and secure your own position on a throne you were never willing to earn honestly. Lord Baldric Kestrel had been standing near the back of the great hall throughout the entire confession, his weathered face growing darker with every word. When Cassian finished speaking, Baldric shouldered his way through the crowd with the deliberate menace of a man who had built an entire house on the principle that intimidation solved most problems worth solving. This is a farce, Baldric snarled, drawing himself up to his full, imposing height at the base of the dais. A staged spectacle to discard my daughter and her claim on this throne. House Kestrel commands a third of the northern armies, Boy King. We will not be humiliated by a servant's fairy tale. Your daughter confessed to ordering the attempted murder of an innocent pack member, Cassian replied, unmoved. This is not a fairy tale, Lord Baldric. This is treason, spoken aloud in front of 40 witnesses. Treason, Baldric spat, is a word powerful men use to remove inconvenient rivals. I know exactly how this game is played. His hand drifted, slow and deliberate, toward the heavy broadsword strapped at his hip. Elara, standing near the edge of the hall with Ren cradled protectively against her chest, felt her breath catch. She had spent this last year learning to read danger in a room, and every instinct she possessed screamed that Baldric Kestrel was about to do something catastrophically foolish. Baldric, Isolde said suddenly, her voice sharp with something close to genuine fear. Don't. Her father didn't so much as glance at her. For House Kestrel, Baldric roared, drawing his broadsword in one violent motion and charging up the dais steps toward the king. What happened next unfolded faster than most of the watching nobles could fully process. Cassian's amber eyes flooded with molten gold light, and his human form began to blur at the edges, a shift so fast, so controlled, that it seemed less like transformation and more like a mask being torn away to reveal what had always been underneath. Within a heartbeat, a massive silver-furred wolf stood where the king had been, easily the size of a warhorse, muscles coiled with lethal, practiced power. Baldric's broadsword swung in a wide, brutal arc. The wolf didn't retreat. He didn't need to. Cassian's shifted form moved with impossible speed, ducking beneath the blade's arc and driving one powerful shoulder directly into Baldric's chest. The old warlord was thrown backward across the marble floor, his broadsword clattering uselessly out of reach, the wind driven entirely from his lungs. Before Baldric could recover, the massive silver wolf had him pinned beneath one enormous paw, jaws hovering inches from his exposed throat, a low, bone-shaking growl rumbling through the stunned silence of the great hall. No one in that room moved. No one dared. Slowly, deliberately, the wolf shifted back, Cassian rising to his feet above the pinned, terrified warlord, his human form once again clothed in dark leather, his amber eyes still burning with barely restrained fury. "You drew a blade on your king," Cassian said, quiet and absolute, in front of the entire northern nobility. "I could execute you on this floor, and every law in Valor would call it justice." Baldric, finally, truly afraid, said nothing at all. From the edge of the hall, Ilara watched with her heart lodged somewhere in her throat, Ren's small fists curled tight in the fabric of her gown. She had seen Cassian's fury in the cellar, had felt the weight of his dominance pressing against her own skin, but she had never seen him fight, never seen the sheer, controlled violence he was capable of when something he loved was directly threatened. It should have frightened her more than it did. Instead, watching him stand over the man who had tried to kill him in front of half the kingdom, she felt something fiercely, unexpectedly close to pride. "This is the man who searched a year for me," she thought. "This is the man who tore a door from its hinges rather than let anyone touch our daughter. Of course he fights like this. He has never once done anything by half measures where we're concerned." "Cassian," she called softly, before she could stop herself, her voice carrying just far enough to reach him across the stunned silence of the hall. He turned his head toward her, amber eyes still burning with the last embers of his fury, and something in his expression eased the moment he found her face in the crowd. "You don't need to kill him," she said quietly. "Not to prove anything to me, and not to prove anything to this hall. They've already seen what you're capable of. Let that be enough." For a long moment, Cassian simply looked at her, and the entire great hall seemed to hold its breath, waiting for his answer. "But I won't," Cassian continued, straightening, his voice carrying once more to every corner of the vast hall. "Because I am not interested in becoming the kind of king who rules through slaughter, even when slaughter is deserved. House Kestrel's soldiers are not responsible for their lord's foolishness today. I will not punish an entire house for the crimes of two people standing in this room." He turned toward Isolde, who stood frozen on the dais, her composure entirely shattered, tears streaking silently down a face that had spent a year perfecting the appearance of untouchable calm. "Isolde Kestrel," Cassian said, "you are stripped of your title as Queen of Valor, effective immediately. You and your father will be escorted to the southern border and banished from this kingdom by nightfall. If either of you sets foot within Valor's borders again, the mercy I have shown today will not be offered a second time." "Cassian," Isolde whispered, her voice breaking entirely, all pretense finally abandoned. "I know what I did was wrong, but you never once tried to love me. Not really. Not from the very first day. Doesn't that count for something?" Cassian's expression, for just a moment, softened into something almost sorrowful. "I was cruel to you too, in my own way," he admitted quietly. "By staying in a marriage neither of us wanted, hoping duty could substitute for something it never could. That failure is mine to carry, and I will. But it does not excuse what you tried to do to an innocent woman and a newborn child. Cruelty cannot be forgiven simply because it grew from loneliness. Isolde, I'm sorry, but this is over." Isolde had no answer left to give. The royal guards escorted her from the hall in silence, her father limping beside her, House Kestrel's decades of carefully built power collapsing in the span of a single devastating morning. In the quiet days that followed Isolde's banishment, Ravenspire Keep felt like a castle slowly remembering how to breathe. Ilara moved through halls that had once made her invisible, now watched by curious, wondering eyes wherever she went. The laundress who had turned out to be the king's true mate, the servant girl who had survived 6 months of impossible secrecy to protect her daughter. She found the attention almost harder to bear than the hiding had been. "You've gone quiet again," Cassian observed one evening, finding her alone on the same balcony where he'd stood the night after the raid, Ren asleep in a cradle nearby, watched over by a nursemaid for the first time in her short life. I don't know how to be seen, Elara admitted. A year of trying to disappear, and now every lord in this castle knows my name. It doesn't feel like relief. It feels like exposure. It will feel different with time, Cassian said, though there was an honesty in his voice that didn't pretend the adjustment would be easy. You won't be scrubbing floors again. You won't be hiding in cellars again. But I understand that safety and comfort aren't always the same thing. Not right away. Elara turned to face him fully. There's something else, she said. Bryn. Cassian's expression flickered with something complicated. Not quite anger, not quite forgiveness. She confirmed the rumors that led Vera to the cellar. Whatever her reasons, that confirmation nearly cost you both your lives. Her sister was threatened, Elara said. Vera gave her an impossible choice, the same way this entire castle has spent years giving impossible choices to people with no power to refuse them. I'm not asking you to pretend it didn't cause harm. I'm asking you to remember that fear makes people do things they'd never choose in safety. Cassian studied her for a long moment, something in his amber eyes softening with quiet respect. You're a kinder judge of character than I am. I've spent this last year being afraid, Elara said simply. It taught me what fear does to people, even good people. I don't want a kingdom that punishes fear as harshly as it punishes cruelty. Those aren't the same thing, Cassian, even when they cause the same damage. Cassian was quiet for a long moment, weighing her words with the same careful consideration he gave every difficult decision that had defined the past several days. Bryn Hollow keeps her position, he finally said, and her sister will be granted a place in the castle's care, so no one can threaten her safety to control Bryn's silence again. But she answers to you from this day forward, not to any matron with divided loyalties, if that arrangement satisfies you both. Elara felt something in her chest loosen for the first time in what felt like years. It does. Bryn wept openly when Elara told her, unable to fully believe that forgiveness could be extended so freely after what her silence had nearly cost. I don't deserve this, Bryn whispered, gripping Elara's hands the same way she had in the cellar, days that felt like a lifetime ago now. Maybe not, Elara admitted honestly, but I've decided I'd rather build a life around mercy than around scorekeeping. You protected your sister the only way you knew how. I understand that better than almost anyone in this castle. Let that be enough. It was, Bryn would later say, the moment she understood exactly why the servants of Ravenspire Keep had already begun quietly, reverently calling Elara their true Luna. Not because of the child in her arms, not because of the king at her side, but because of a mercy that asked nothing in return. The formal coronation was set for the first full moon following Isolde's banishment. A deliberate choice, Cassian explained, honoring the old pact traditions that held the moon as witness to a Luna's binding to her mate and her kingdom both. Elara stood in a private antechamber off the Great Hall, dressed in a gown of deep forest green that had been tailored specifically for her over the past 2 weeks. Nothing like the coarse, scratching servant's tunics she'd worn for years, and nothing like the cold, gilded formality she'd expected either. It felt, somehow, exactly like her. You look terrified, Bryn observed gently, adjusting the delicate silver circlet nestled into Elara's dark hair. I am terrified, Elara admitted. An hour ago, I was a laundress. Now half the kingdom is waiting outside that door to watch me become their Luna. You've survived worse than a room full of curious nobles, Bryn reminded her. You survived 6 months of hiding a royal secret in a cellar, with guards hunting for you. You can survive this. A soft knock interrupted them. Cassian stood in the doorway, dressed in formal ceremonial dark blue and silver. Ren cradled against his chest in fine white linens, wide amber eyes blinking curiously at the room around her. Ready? He asked softly. No, Elara admitted, with a small, breathless laugh. But I don't think I'll ever feel ready. I think I just have to walk through the door anyway. Cassian crossed the room and pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead, the formal weight of a king momentarily set aside for the simple tenderness of a mate. That's the only kind of ready that's ever mattered, he said. I wasn't ready to be king either. I walked through that door anyway, and I found you waiting on the other side of it, even if it took this long to realize it. The great hall of Ravenspire Keep had transformed entirely from the tense, dangerous chamber it had been days earlier. Silver banners bearing the Draven crest hung alongside garlands of late autumn wildflowers, a small, deliberate touch Cassian had insisted on, a quiet nod to the woods where their bond had first been sealed beneath a bonfire's glow. Every lord and lady who had witnessed Isolde's downfall now stood witness to something entirely different. The formal, moonlit binding of an alpha king to a mate the entire court had once overlooked without a second thought. As Elara walked the length of the hall, the assembled nobility fell to their knees in slow, rippling waves, bowing not out of fear, as they had for Isolde, but out of something that felt, remarkably, like genuine respect. Cassian met her at the base of the dais, Ren still nestled against his chest, and took Elara's hand in front of the entire gathered court. "A little over a year ago," he announced, his voice carrying easily through the silent hall, "I met a woman beneath a bonfire who taught me, in a single night, what it felt like to be seen as a man instead of a crown. I spent that year searching for her, never realizing she had been protecting our daughter within these very walls the entire time, surviving alone against odds that would have broken almost anyone else." His eyes found Elara's, warm and unwavering. "I will not make the mistake of overlooking her again. Lords and ladies of Valor, allow me to formally present your true Luna, Elara Draven, and the rightful heir to the Northern Throne, Princess Ren." The hall erupted, not into the frightened, forced submission that had once greeted Isolde, but into something closer to genuine celebration, a kingdom quietly relieved to finally have a Luna whose strength had been proven not through political maneuvering, but through 6 months of impossible, unwavering love. That night, after the last of the celebrating nobles had finally retired, and the great hall had emptied into candle-lit silence, Cassian led Elara out beyond the castle walls, into the same stretch of forest where the Hunter's Moon Festival had been held a little over a year before. The bonfires were long since cold, the wooden masks long since packed away, but the trees remained exactly as she remembered them, tall and dark and full of secrets. "I promise to teach you," Cassian said, his eyes glinting amber in the moonlight. "There's no better night for it than this one." Elara felt her pulse quicken, not with fear this time, but with something closer to anticipation. "Now, in this dress." "The dress can be mended," Cassian said, a rare, boyish grin breaking across his face. The same grin, she realized with a soft ache in her chest, that she had fallen for beneath a bonfire a little over a year ago. "Your wolf has waited long enough." He guided her through the shift, the way his own father had once guided him. Not with commands, but with patience, coaxing the change forward the way one coaxes a nervous animal from hiding, rather than forcing it. "Feel the moon first," he told her. "Let it pull, don't fight the pull. Your wolf isn't something separate from you, Elara. She's the part of you that never learned to be afraid." It took 3 attempts, 3 failed, frustrated starts where nothing happened beyond a faint prickling warmth beneath her skin. On the 4th attempt, Elara closed her eyes, thought of Ren's small, sleeping face, thought of 6 months spent protecting her with nothing but human hands and desperate courage, and let go of every lesson that had ever taught her to make herself smaller. The shift, when it finally came, felt less like transformation and more like remembering. She rose on 4 legs, silver-brown fur catching the moonlight, and let out a sound that was half startled laugh, half wondering howl. Beside her, Cassian's own massive silver wolf form pressed close, warm and solid, his low, rumbling huff unmistakably proud. They ran together through the same trees where they'd first met as strangers, and for the first time since the night of the raid, Elara felt something in her chest unclench completely. Not relief, not gratitude, but pure, uncomplicated joy. This, she thought, feeling the cool night air rush past her fur, the forest floor solid and alive beneath her paws. This is what it feels like to finally, completely belong somewhere. Spring came early to Valor that year, or so the older servants of Ravenspire Keep liked to claim, as though the kingdom itself had been holding its breath through a long, difficult winter and finally allowed itself to exhale. Ilara stood in the same laundry cellar where everything had nearly ended 6 months earlier, though it looked different now, brighter, somehow, despite being the same cold stone room it had always been. She came down here sometimes still, not out of necessity, but out of a quiet need to remember the version of herself who had knelt on this floor, terrified and certain she was about to lose everything, and to feel, with something like wonder, how far that frightened young mother had come. "You always find your way back down here," Cassian said, appearing in the doorway with Ren balanced on his hip, now old enough to reach for things with small, determined hands, her amber eyes bright with curiosity as she studied the world around her. "It reminds me what mattered," Ilara said, taking her daughter from his arms and pressing a kiss to her soft dark hair. "It's easy to forget, in a castle full of silk and celebration, what it felt like to have nothing but her and my own 2 hands to protect her with." "You never had nothing," Cassian said, moving to stand beside her. "You had more courage than half the warriors in my army, and you never once let it break." Ilara smiled, something soft and settled finally living permanently in her chest, where terror had lived for so long. "I had help, eventually. From you. From Bryn. From a kingdom that turned out to be kinder than I expected, once given the chance." Below them, in the laundry yard, Bryn's laughter carried up through the cellar window, her sister safely enrolled now in the castle's care, both of them finally free from the fear that had once forced an impossible choice onto a frightened young woman. "Isolde sent a letter," Cassian said after a moment, his voice carefully neutral. "From beyond the southern border. She's asked for nothing, no reinstatement, no reconsideration of the banishment, only that Ren be told, someday, that her father's first wife wasn't simply a villain in a story. That loneliness made a woman capable of cruelty she wasn't born choosing." Ilara considered that for a long moment, watching her daughter reach curiously toward the afternoon light spilling through the cellar window. "I think that's a fair request," she finally said. "I spent 6 months learning that fear makes people do things love alone would never ask of them. I don't think I'm in a position to deny Isolde the same understanding I ask this kingdom to extend to Bryn." Cassian studied her with the same quiet wonder he'd carried since the night he'd first found her kneeling on this very floor. "You continue to surprise me," he said, "every single day." "Good," Ilara said, leaning into his side as Ren babbled happily between them, reaching one small hand toward her father's face. "A kingdom built on mercy needs a Luna capable of surprising it, every now and then." Years later, the servants of Ravenspire Keep would still tell the story to new arrivals during quiet evenings in the laundry hall, the story of the invisible laundress who had hidden a royal secret in the cellar shadows, who had knelt on cold stone and begged armed men for her daughter's life, and who had risen, against every impossible odds stacked against her, to become the most beloved Luna Valor had known in a generation. They told it not as a story about a crown, though a crown was certainly part of it. They told it as a story about what a mother would survive, what a kingdom could become when mercy was chosen over cruelty, and what it truly meant for someone the world had once overlooked entirely to finally, completely be seen. Ilara Draven, once nothing more than an unnoticed sparrow moving quietly through castle halls, had become something the entire kingdom now watched with reverence. And little Princess Ren, growing up surrounded by a love her mother had once fought an entire castle to protect, would never once know a single day of the fear that had shaped her earliest months of life. Some nights, when the castle was quiet and the moon hung full and silver over the northern towers, Ilara would carry her daughter down to that same laundry cellar, now converted into a small sunlit nursery, and tell her, even before Ren was old enough to understand the words, the story of the sparrow who had hidden in the shadows, and the wolf who had torn a door from its hinges rather than let her disappear. "You will never have to hide who you are," Ilara would whisper against her daughter's dark hair, amber eyes blinking sleepily up at her in the candlelight. Not from anyone, not ever again. And somewhere above them, in a kingdom finally learning to breathe easier, an alpha king who had once believed love was a luxury he couldn't afford, stood watch over his family, and understood, at last, that he had never been more powerful than he was in that quiet, unremarkable moment. Simply a father, listening to the woman he loved sing their daughter to sleep. The nightmare in the shadows was finally, completely over. Thank you for watching all the way through. If you enjoyed today's story, a quick like and a subscription would mean a lot. And don't forget to tell me in the comments what you think happened after the final scene. I'll see you in the next adventure.